Okay, welcome back. And in today's session, we'll be looking at business continuity and disaster recovery. If this is your first time tuning in, this session will be suitable for someone looking to sit the ISC2 CC exam or the CompTIA Security Plus exam. I'm Benjamin, and let's get started. Okay, when we look at business continuity, we are looking at what would help the business to recover its operations. So it's looking at more than just technology. And a lot of times we look at people, whether there are backups in place, people who can step into a certain role in order to replace someone who may not be available due to certain reasons. We are also looking at processes, certain processes, maybe sales would take place using technology. Maybe we accept, let's say, card payment. And when that fails, we would have to fall back to something that is using maybe cash. And that could be a non-technology solution in order to ensure that the business can continue to operate as per usual. And that is where lies the difference with disaster recovery. Disaster recovery is primarily technical and it's focused on restoring systems. So when we look at disaster recovery, we are looking at how can we recover, let's say, the credit card payment system. Whereas in business continuity, it's more than just that. It could be the easiest way in order to continue resume business would be to accept cash. And then over the next couple of days, probably we look at disaster recovery and how to recover the credit card system so that the business can continue to accept credit cards. So this is where disaster recovery actually feeds back into business continuity. It is a subset of business continuity which focuses on the technology aspects. And lastly, we look at the concept of a business impact analysis. So in order to do business continuity, we need to know what are the critical operations that the business has. And that is really where business impact analysis comes in. We identify them, we set the impact, what would happen if we are unable to accept card payment. For example, we would lose sales and things like that. And we would set priorities. How much loss would we expect to encounter if a certain system is down, and which are the more critical ones which would have to be recovered on a timely basis. And so this actually sums up the three concepts that we have to look at when we talk about business continuity and disaster recovery. Okay, let's look at the first question. Which activity should be performed first when developing a business continuity plan? So the first option A is selecting a disaster recovery site. So this is a bit premature at this moment because even before we select a disaster recovery site, we need to figure out if we need a disaster recovery site in the first place. Businesses may have a lot of their operations in the cloud, in which case they may not need a second disaster recovery site. They could perhaps their employees could work from home. That's also a valid kind of a strategy if the primary business site is actually not functioning. And so a disaster recovery site may not actually be required in certain cases. So this is definitely out. Conducting a business impact analysis. For now, this seems like a very promising option because we are looking at what are the critical business processes that we have to look at, and obviously what are the impacts, and finally to set the priorities on what needs to be recovered in a timely manner. Okay, this is most promising at the moment, but let's take a look at C, implementing backup solutions. So for this question, we are looking at what needs to be done first, and implementing backup solutions is definitely not the first thing to be done because we need to identify what needs to be backed. So this is definitely not one of the solutions. So this is definitely not the right answer. And lastly, performing a tabletop exercise. So to perform a tabletop exercise, we actually need the business impact analysis to be done first, so we know what are the processes to step through in the event of a situation. And so because the tabletop exercise would actually be stepping through all of these processes. So this is also definitely not the first step. And so we have our answer to be B for the first question. Okay, moving on. Question 2. A company determines that it can tolerate no more than 30 minutes of data loss for a critical database. What metric best represents this requirement? So the keyword here is 30 minutes of data loss. And when we are looking at data loss, we often look into RPO. So let's take a look at RTO first, or the recovery time objective. And the keyword for recovery time objective is how many minutes of downtime and not data loss. So when we look at downtime, we are looking at how long the system can be down. And when we talk about RPO, or recovery point objective, we are looking at what point, at how far back or what point the backup has to be. And so we are looking at how many minutes of data loss. So in this case, what this means is that we would actually need to have backups that are at a lower duration than 30 minutes to ensure that if we have a particular incident, we can actually recover to a backup that is less than 30 minutes ago, and so we have less than 30 minutes of data loss. Okay, let's take a look at MTTR. This is normally mean time to respond, and this normally relates a lot more to SOC operations when we look at what's the amount of time the analysts take before they respond to an alert that has come up onto the dashboard. And finally, we look at SLA, which is service level agreement. And SLA comes up a lot when there's a vendor that is providing a service for a company, and normally there will be a lot of metrics that are specified in the SLA. So there could be things like RTO, RPO, and MTTR, which are specified in the contract and this would be the SLA. So for example, a vendor that's providing backup services might promise an RPO of less than 30 minutes, and this would be stated as in the SLA. And so they would actually perform backups on behalf of the organization to ensure that there's no more than 30 minutes of data loss. So for this particular question, the answer would be B. Okay, moving on to the third question. Which disaster recovery site provides the fastest recovery time but is also the most expensive to maintain? So obviously there will be trade-offs. If we want the fastest recovery time, it's going to cost the most. There's no two ways around it. So let's look at what is a cold site. So a cold site only has the infrastructure. So for example, the power, the utilities, the internet connection, and that's about it. So it's just an empty room, and we will need to move in hardware, we need to restore the data and everything like that. So it takes the most amount of time, but it's also the cheapest to maintain. So a warm site would have both the hardware and the networking that is in place already. So all the cables are connected, and what you need to do is just to fire up the hardware, and then you need to copy in the data, or a copy of the data, and then you can work from there. And finally, we look at the hot site. So for a hot site, we have all the equipment there in place already, and we also have the data, or at least a replica of the data in place. And so this would be the fastest to recover from. All you need to do is switch over the traffic to go to this hot site, and it's already operational to go. So in terms of cost and in terms of time, the cold site will take the longest. It's the longest, and the warm site would be the fastest. The hot site would be the fastest. So it goes from fastest to longest, and obviously in terms of cost as well, this would be the cheapest, and this would be more expensive, and this would be the most expensive of all. So for this question, we are looking at C. Okay, question 4. A system requires minimal downtime but can tolerate some data loss. Which backup strategy best supports this requirement? Okay, so we've looked at downtime and data loss in the first question. In the previous question, and data loss relates to the RPO, and downtime relates to the RTO. So let's quickly take a look at some of the answers. So weekly full backups. And daily full backups. Let's look at some of these options together, because it is about full backups. When we take a look at full backups, it will take the longest to recover, because what we are basically doing is taking the whole image of the system, and we will have to restore the entire image of the system once again. It's a huge file. The entire hard disk could be multiple terabytes. And it takes a long time in order to write back that data and to be able to be functional again. But when we look at incremental backups, so what are incremental backups are basically you have, and then we take an additional backup, which is this is an incremental backup itself, and again backup every 30 minutes or so, whatever we want the backup duration, we take additional incremental backups. And so this would be the fastest to recover, because we can always take from any point in time, and then we'll just write up what's missing. So this would actually satisfy our minimal downtime requirement, and so this would be a good option for us. Okay, lastly, we take a look at the last option, and manual backups are frequently slow as well, because it's done manually instead of automated. So I think one thing we want to look at in this particular topic, since it's also related, is the idea of a differential backup. So a differential backup is not the same as an incremental backup. It's not equal to an incremental backup. And if we have this particular diagram here, if we can see what is a differential backup, what we do is we have the base image and we take a differential backup like that. It's same as incremental at this point. But when we take the second differential backup, what we do is the entire thing is taken as a whole. So it's this two, we take it as another differential backup, and we take another differential backup. And when things get, and when there's too many layers, we'll redo the entire thing as a second base layer, and then we'll do that, differential or incremental backup on top of it. So this is the difference between an incremental and a differential backup. Okay, moving on to question 5. Which testing method allows stakeholders to review roles, responsibilities, and procedures without disrupting operations? So the keyword here is without disrupting operations. So we don't want to disrupt the normal day-to-day BAU or the business as usual that's happening. Full interruption test, based on the language itself, you know that this would definitely disrupt operations. Basically, what you're doing is you're shutting down all the regular processes that are in use, and you are moving over to the backup processes. So this would definitely this would definitely disrupt operations. So when we take backup test, doesn't really make sense here. There's no such thing as a backup test. So when we look at the tabletop exercise, this is a very promising one, because for tabletop exercises, what we do is we just get the people together, and we would run through what are the roles that everybody has, what would their responsibilities be, and we'll just talk through it. And so this very much fulfills the requirements here, and it doesn't disrupt any operations at all. So for our parallel test, what would happen is that we have the main that's running, and we'll have the backup that is running at the same time. So we'll be running both at the same time, and there would be some disruptions to the operation since you have to spin up the backups and things like that. So for this question, we'll be looking at the answer of C. Okay, question 6. Which scenario best represents a business continuity concern rather than a disaster recovery concern? So if you remember from our concepts earlier, business continuity covers both people, process, and the technology. Whereas disaster recovery is more of the technology, the technical side of things. So when we look at restoring a database from backup, this is very much technology. Rebuilding a failed server, technology as well. Relocating staff to an alternate work site. So this is more of a people. Remember we talked about you can work from home, or if it's completely cloud, then you would not be so worried if there's some incident that happened on the primary site. Replacing that damaged network equipment, it's mostly technology as well. So definitely, business continuity would be C, which is a more people kind of a concern. Okay, moving on to question 7. A company identifies a single database server whose failure would halt order processing. Which concept best describes this situation? So risk transfer is risk management. We've talked about this, or risk mitigation. So it's not really in this topic here, so this is out. Recovery point objectives. So this is about how much data loss is acceptable. The amount of data loss acceptable. And when we look at recovery point objective, that it's not really what we are looking at here. We are looking at a single database server, and when that fails, we would not be able to process orders as well at all. And this looks like a single point of failure because it's this single point which is the database server, and if it fails, we would totally not be able to process any orders. So mean time between failures is a metric. So it basically we are measuring how reliable the system is, and the lower it is, the more reliable and less likely to fail. Okay, question 8. Which factor most influences the selection of an appropriate disaster recovery solution? Okay, hardware vendor preference. There's some preferences. Maybe when we choose a disaster recovery solution, we might prefer vendors which maybe are already running on the primary side, or we are more familiar with, so there is less friction if we need to spin up the secondary side. But we are looking at most influence, and this may not be really the most suitable answer. Regulatory compliance requirements. Maybe a lot of businesses will say this would be the most important thing if they are very compliance focused. The regulator requires us to have a disaster recovery solution, and so we are doing all this just basically for the sake of regulatory compliance. But this is not a very good kind of a mentality to have. When we have a disaster recovery solution, it should be for your business. It should be to promote your business in order so that you can continue your business operations and continue to earn profits, and not because it is just to satisfy some regulatory requirement. So yeah, a lot of people are doing this, but this is actually not a very good kind of a mindset to have. Yeah. Okay, business impact analysis, and definitely this is something that is most relevant here, because from your business impact analysis, again, we would look at what are your critical business functions. We will look at what are the impacts in the case of an incident, and finally we'll look at the priorities, and this would really influence which disaster recovery solution we are trying to seek. So for example, if let's return back to one of our earlier examples. If we are a point of sales, doing retail, and if let's say our credit card system fails, what would be the immediate impact? We would be unable to take card transactions, and our priority is to continue serving our customers. So it could be let's revert to cash for the meantime while we try to recover the system. And this would most influence the selection here, because we would definitely want to move to cash first, and we would need people we will need a cash register and things like that, which as part of our disaster recovery solution. And finally, looking at network bandwidth availability. So I would say this is not really something that is most influence, because the business could completely operate offline. For example, as I said earlier, it could be a cash business, and really you don't really need a network in that case. You can still continue your business. And so for this question, the answer would be C. Okay, we have come to the end of this session, and I hope it has been useful. Appreciate if you could subscribe if so, and stay tuned for future videos. Thank you.